Okay. There we
All
go.
right, welcome everyone to Mass Farm to School webinar today on Farm to Pre-K, Gardens that Engage Young Children. My name is Dinah Mack. I'm the Education Program Manager with Massachusetts Farm to School, and I have the pleasure of introducing Hope Guardenier today to lead this webinar. And if at any time you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A, you can put them in the chat, and if you want to talk, we can also unmute you if you want to check in with Hope about anything. If you're unfamiliar with Mass Farm to School, we're an organization that works to strengthen local farms and fisheries and promote healthy communities by increasing local food purchasing and education at schools. There's a lot of ways you can get involved with Mass Farm to School. Our website is at the end of this presentation, which you will all get a copy of. We have professional learning opportunities throughout the year. We have a year-long professional learning opportunity, which is an institute for school teams. We have a conference coming up. If you're near the Northampton area, we have on March 22nd a Farm to School conference. It's going to be at Smith College. You can find out more about that on our website. And the theme this year is on climate resiliency and building community. And Hope will actually be there leading a discussion on greenhouses. We also have a lot of networking opportunities throughout the year. We do policy work, and if you subscribe to our newsletters, you can keep up with what we're doing. We also have a Harvest of the Month program for educators and cafeteria. So a lot of ways to get involved. And Hope, I'm going to just give you the floor to introduce yourself and talk about what we're going to do today.
Okay, great. So this is kind of the outline of the day. I'm going to tell you briefly about me, and I'm hoping that maybe it will help me kind of focus this webinar if I know a little bit more about who's listening in. And then we're going to talk about garden design for young learners, garden activity ideas, and then the tips and tricks, which is actually like what I find to be most helpful. It's kind of in the details of how you do things with kids. So we'll talk a little bit about things that I do, and hopefully you'll have things to add to that conversation, and then leave plenty of time for questions at the end. You can go to the next slide. Awesome. So I am a garden and farm-based educator. During the school year, I run garden and food education programming in 6 different schools in the Pioneer Valley with my organization, School Sprouts. And then in the summertime, I run the farm and garden camp at Hampshire College. So I am spending a lot of time mostly outside, although this winter we're doing new programming in the Northampton Public Schools with food education. So I am straight out of teaching kindergartners and first graders about making gnocchi, potato pasta, and herb salts today. And that's kind of what I've been doing over the last 20 years, different schools, different programming, sometimes after school, sometimes in school, but it's been a long time. And I've built a lot of gardens for schools. So I would welcome questions, not just about my work with pre-K and kind of tips and tricks there, but if you have questions about working with elementary students, I'm totally open to those as well. That's a lot of who I work with as well. So this is audience participation. I'm wondering if you could throw up in the chat maybe a little bit about who you are, and yeah, we'll just do a little like Jeopardy. Do, 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 do. So, yeah, who are you out there? Right now, there are 15 of you. Anybody want to throw up their name and school affiliation? Are you a pre-K teacher? Are you a parent of a preschooler? Are you a community member? Oh, the chat is disabled.
Oh.
I know.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Hold on one moment. Oh.
So we spend most of our time in gardens and farms and not in front of Zoom.
Hold on one moment. All right, try this now. Try the chat now.
It's showing hosts and panelists. It's not showing, it's
Ah,
not showing.
give me a moment, please.
Okay,
Um, oh man.
okay,
No, I did not set this up, so the security, I must break into it. Hold on one moment.
okay.
You could
So
also put it in, you could put it into the Q&A as well, because we can read that while I'm trying to
yeah,
fix this.
that is, that is definitely open and you're using it. Okay. So anyway, this information will just help me like target if I'm talking to parents or if I'm talking to preschool teachers, and also target, what you're hoping to get out of this. But while you start throwing that information there, I'll just kind of keep rolling. So Dinah, if you want to go to the next slide, I think everybody probably knows what they're looking to put in there. And I'll just start talking about garden design. Okay. And maybe the chat will be enabled and maybe you'll just put it in the Q&A. So the garden design is one of the things that this webinar really was talking about doing and talking about. But there's a million different ways to design a garden for young learners, and I'll give you examples of the things that I have done, but I also know a lot of like preschools who have done things very differently and really are gardening on like a micro scale with like little tiny pots or those little peat pots that inflate and doing just window based gardening or super small beds. But with the preschoolers that I work with, I tend to use I've I have used in the past just low, long garden beds. These are a little bit wider on the left side. The kale and lettuce bed there is a little bit wider than the ones that I typically use with preschool. It was the one I had a picture of. I tend to go for like a 3x. So it could be 3x8. It could be 3x6. The garden beds that are on the ground that are made out of wood tend not to be any shorter than 6 feet because I don't really feel like it's hard to get kids around them. Um, these ones on the right, these like galvanized steel beds are ones that I've started using in the last few years, and you've probably seen them around. They're definitely getting more popular, and I really like them. I actually find that with the younger the child, the taller the bed, right? So it's helpful to me for the beds to be higher when I'm working with little kids because they basically just walk right up to it and they can put their hands into it. And so these come at a minimum of like 17, 18 inches, which is harder to get at. It requires a lot of forward feet in order to actually get up to that, and it requires a lot of reinforcement if you're going to make it out of wood. It's not impossible, but it just wooden beds over time tend to bow out, and so these metal beds are really easy to assemble. In fact, I can have preschool even help me like with their little fine motor skills, like twisting the nuts onto the bolts, so they can really get into it. But a higher garden bed does tend to work better for them. So it could be something like a bunch of 5-gallon buckets, which would give you that height, or one of these galvanized steel beds, which are definitely an investment, right? But they're supposed to last for like 30 years. And again, I've only started using them in the last 3 years or so. They look great still. They're totally holding up, but I can't speak to whether or not they'll actually last 30 years. But my hope is that they'll last something close to that because they definitely cost a bunch of money to put into it. I can build like a wooden bed, like the one on the left, for about $50, and the galvanized steel ones run closer to 120 for the one that you're looking at. It comes in a 2-pack, so you get 2 of those. But these are, yeah, the ones on the right are definitely pretty good. The other style of garden bed that requires more like work, more effort to actually build, but will last a long time is made out of like 4x4s. So if you look in the background, I don't know if I can actually like you can't see my screen, you're looking at Dinah's screen. But if you zoom in, can you zoom in on it? I don't know if Dinah can zoom in on the picture on the
I
right
can't
and
zoom in, but I do
background.
want to say the
But
chat.
the one in the background of the galvanized steel bed is like a 4x4 overlay, like a log cabin style build. And those are, you can get higher with those. They won't bow out as much. There's a lot more, just again, there's a lot more girth to them because of the amount of lumber. So that's another option. The challenge that I have with those is that kids tend to climb on them because they're really wide on the edges. And so they wind up using them as balance beams, sometimes when I'm there and sometimes when I'm not. And that will damage them over time. And so they can't walk on the galvanized steel ones because they're just super thin. And it reduces like kind of inappropriate material use. So that's this circle versus like square shape doesn't really seem to matter for me. I tend to spread kids out. Preschool classes tend to be smaller than your average elementary school classroom. So I tend to, either be able to fit all, sometimes I have a group of like 6. If I'm getting the afternoon class on a Thursday, there might only be 6 kids in my preschool class. So I can sometimes get them all around a small garden bed, but I tend to have a bunch of these for preschool so that we can spread out, and everybody can kind of have their own space around the garden beds. All right. I love what you're putting in the chat. It's
Hey, Hope,
really
you also have some introduction
cool.
in the Q&A. Hope.
Great. Farm school for pre-K to 2nd grade. Like the farm school. But Allie, like school year farm school, not just like the farm school is residential, but you were thinking something more for the whole year. All right, so I love it. We have Martha's Vineyard in the house. Fantastic. We love Martha's Vineyard, and the Institute. So let's see here. Okay, and backyard growers. Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks for throwing things into the Q&A. Thanks for giving me a chance to actually like it. I'm having issues right now. Okay. So Dinah, you can go to the next slide. Oh my gosh. For real. This is like okay. Incredibly affectionate cat. All right, so moving on to garden activity ideas for, yeah, geez. Sorry. So moving on to garden activity ideas. I have a couple of different things that I've laid out here, and hopefully some of it will be helpful. I do a lot of seed selection. This time of year when I go into the preschool that I work in Williamsburg, we're doing seed selection. It'll be kind of our first thing back. We'll be just kind of looking at pick images of the different things that we want to plant. And these are some of the different plants that I tend to do with pre-K and K. Kindergarten and all of the Northampton schools plants potatoes. They're really fun. They're familiar. They they grow pretty quickly. The way that they grow, like we plant them deep and then we kind of keep having to hill them, right, as they grow. And so that's kind of a continuing project. It's not just like poke the seed in and walk away. So that's fun for them. And they're also like really, yeah, they're big enough. I sometimes save all of the little potatoes from the prior year to be my seed potatoes. So instead of cutting them and winding up with like the exposed, if you've ever planted potatoes, right, they say that if you cut them so that you have an eye on each piece, you're supposed to let them cure before you plant them. And I like to have the kids actually do the cutting, but that means that I have to wait another 3 weeks potentially when I see them again to get them to plant, and they don't love hanging out for 3 weeks after being cut. So I tend to just use like the little ones that we harvested the last year and give all of them their own little potato to like check out. And we do potatoes of all different colors, um, and that's also fun too, talking about potato rainbows. Peas, so many different types of peas, different heights of peas, different like you know date to harvest, so you can do like a different succession planting, really easy, really fun to poke in. um we talk about measuring with like their fingers, like how far down they should push them in, and with preschool it's like their whole finger, as opposed to with fifth grade it's like to the first bendy knuckle here. So unless they're really going for it, they can't really plant them too deep. And then we do a whole variety of cucumbers. So pickling and long cucumbers, and those like serpentine cucumbers and lemon cucumbers and cucamelons. They love the cucamelons. So we'll look at what you're looking at on the left side here is what I use for my sunflower seed selection. So they're on the little binder rings, and when I use them, I take them off the binder rings and I give each group of kids like a whole selection of them. And there's generally a lot of grown-ups that come out to the garden with me as the garden educator when preschool comes out and when kindergarten comes out. And so there are grown-ups hovering around. And if the kids are like, we like this yellow one, then the grown-up reads out loud all the information about it, like how tall is it and how many flowers are there and how long does it take to bloom, and does it make big seeds or little seeds. And so we can kind of like have grown up help with the reading part, and the kids can be looking at the pictures of them. So I've had these for a while. They're still functional, but I've thought about like redoing them, making them bigger, making the picture bigger, and but keeping them on the binder clip so that you can kind of like sort out a set to the kids, and then collect them back and like put them back on the binder ring, and then you just have your sets ready to go. So I do similar things with all of these other like different types of cucumber pictures and different types of pea pictures, and different types of potatoes, so that they can get like a visual on what it is that they're actually planting. All right, so great. Yeah, next. Cool. Another thing that I do a lot with little learners out in the garden is a lot of herb work. So even today with the winter garden cooking classes, we are talking about herbs, and we made herb salts. So I had the kids do like we used our sense of smell. It was like 5 senses is a big part of what kindergarten is doing, but also pre-K. And so we in little cups had lots of different herbs, and they got to smell them, and then they passed them around the room, and everyone smelled different ones, and we voted on which ones we liked, and we talked about how the ones that we liked the best we should plant a lot of in the garden, and the ones that we liked the least we maybe wouldn't plant as much. And that's how we built the herb salt. So they really liked the smell of the garlic, so we put more garlic powder in. We put a little less basil in, we put some parsley in, we put a little bit of oregano. They didn't love the dill, so that was like just a like half a teaspoon, and we built it, and then we blended it, and then we tried it on rice today. So like the garden connection is that we harvest these things in the fall and we dry them. So this is early spring mint, but like the mint, it's mint gets gigantic, and like we cut it a lot all through the season, and we dry it, and then we earlier this winter we made it into little tea bags, and we tried the mint tea in the classroom. And but they love the mint, they love like the feel of it, they love the smell of it, they love the lemon balm. We have oregano, which I call the pizza herb. We have sorrel, we have sage, a lot of sage, we have lavender. So all of the herbs are like a really big part of what preschool is doing. And because they keep coming back over and over and over again, you can like do this every month. You can keep going out and like cutting mint and like hanging it up. And like, I don't know, what are you going to do with that much mint? But like, if you, it depends on how many kids you have, but they could all like bring home a bunch of like mint tea bags, and you could make mint sachets, and have like tea time in school like every Friday, that you use your mint that you've harvested from the garden and throw a little honey in it, and it's great. It's also, um, if we're talking about pre-K and K, they're not necessarily strong readers yet. And so the things in the garden are labeled, there are signs, but those guys are not actually reading the signs yet. And so being able to send the kids out with their sense of smell to find the thing that they're looking for, right? So if you're, is this lemon balm? I don't know. Smell it. Does it smell like lemon? Does it smell like mint? Then it's mint. So it's an easy way. Those herbs are a really easy way for them to use their senses, be able to be confident in identifying things. And so I really love doing a lot with herbs. And if I was just starting out, if I just like, was doing like an easy preschool garden, I would get a bunch of those galvanized steel things, and I would put in a bunch of herbs into them and like call it good. And like they could just go out and explore them, and we could do things with them, and we could talk about different textures, and we could do little leaf rubbings, and we can dry them and do all of that kind of stuff. So that's a lot about herbs that I use. If you have questions, like if you're sitting there like, I want to know more about this, you can either hold on to it or put it in the Q&A, or like, I don't, if you want to like raise a hand and come off mute and ask, that's fine too. But I'm gonna keep on unless there's anything like that. Okay. So, next slide. So, the pre-K and K for me is like the basis of the next 6 years of time that they're going to spend with me in the garden. So my preschool kids are at public preschools where they are likely to go to kindergarten, right? They might be in preschool for a couple of years, but they're likely to go to kindergarten and first and second and keep on going, unless they move out of the district. So I see those ages as being kind of foundational to safe and effective tool use in the garden. And so I do a lot of like focus on different types of tools. And we start out like when I meet them in the spring or in the fall, they're like babies, right? They're so young. And so we're just starting out with hands, and we're really like, squishing soil together, we're digging out potatoes, or we really are just starting with our fingers, getting into the dirt, and really kind of allowing for the teachable moments, because they are so distracted, right? Like the worm, whatever it is, like the bug, there's just it's nearly impossible to like, we're going to plant these things in a straight row right here. Like the moment we start like digging in the dirt and they find a bug, it's all over. So I don't even really like worry about that too much. We're just kind of exploring. We're talking about who lives here. We're finding out who lives here. We're learning how to like interact with the things that live in the soil in a really safe way. Oftentimes by not picking them up, which is really difficult, but I do try and get them to like look with their eyes and maybe like just gently pet the worm, but try not to put the worm in their hands. And it's just that's just foundational for me in my gardens. Like, everybody can kind of do things differently with the critters who live in the dirt, but that's something that comes up for me a lot. But eventually we start to move into like different tools, and we've already talked about how our hands are the best tools, right? Like these are super functional, right? We can poke with them, we can grab stuff with them. Our hands are going to be our best garden tools forever. But there are other tools that we can use. Maybe we need to dig a bigger hole, and we start with like, I use little, I actually thought about like, I do another like tools of the trade thing that I've done for the Mass Farm to School Institute in the past, where I like pull out all of the tools that I use, but I'll just describe. And you know, if you have tools, great. And if you're looking for pre-K specific tools, let me know, and I'm happy to like send you pictures of what I use. But I start out with like really small little plastic tools, right? So those are like my intro shovels. They're like the little kid shovels you find in like, you know, kid sections of garden centers. And we talk a lot about how to properly dig a hole, or like stick. And the first thing we do is like just stick and twist, stick and twist, stick and twist. And that's just like how we're loosening the soil up. And then we move on to digging the hole and sticking and tipping it back and moving on. And then I might move on to like rakes, right? So like a little cultivator. Issues again. So uh, so cultivators, like I tend to stay away from the metal, at least initially, but little plastic cultivators and how these tools are different. And then we move on to larger shovel tools, which actually they were using in the first slide when we were looking, or the garden design slide when we were looking at the galvanized steel beds. They're called utility shovels, but they're like small D-handled shovels. They're probably like 2.5 feet. So they're really small, and so we're like moving up incrementally, and we're talking about like, you can see my teeny tiny, these are teeny tiny wheelbarrows on the left side here, like you know, how you hold a wheelbarrow. And like wheelbarrow use is actually really tricky, because you move the opposite way that you want the wheelbarrow to go. So, you know, you have to step to the left if you want the wheelbarrow to go to the right. And it's like a lot of kind of like spatial dissonance that's going on for them, but it's really great. It's like great learning. And it's also great like teamwork, because they're all holding on to the sides and they're trying to get the dirt from like the dirt pile to the garden bed and fill stuff up, or we're sifting dirt into them. So we kind of go incrementally up, and you know, getting into garden hose is kind of towards the end, hose and rakes, because they tend to be things that kids are um like the Seven Dwarves didn't do us any favors, because it's just like this kind of hacking at and like carrying over your shoulder kind of thing, which is absolutely not appropriate in the garden. So once I feel like they're safe with all the other stuff, then I kind of move up. But we will spend like, an activity might just be like digging with shovels. And we talk about just like prepping the soil, or like raking this flat, or like clearing out leaves. And the point of that activity is really to get them familiar with the tools and to build that foundation of safe and effective tool use. So I encourage that just as an activity, because I think it's great for them to use real tools and to get that basis young. Next slide. All right, so these are things that I'm going to talk about, and if you have any questions, throw them in the chat, and I'll just kind of go through what I mean by all of these bullets. So, and these are the things that I feel like are the, you know, the devil's in the details. Like these are the details that really help my garden programs with little kids flow, and not get too chaotic. So so hopefully they serve the same purpose for you. So seeding areas. If you're if you've already got a garden, hopefully you already have a seeding area. If you're thinking about building a garden for your preschool, this is going to be one of like the first things that I think is really important to install, and whatever, you know, shape it takes is fine. It could just be like little rug squares on the grass. But having a place for kids to go and sit. Kids, especially at this age, are so used to like rug time, right? We're going to sit on the rug, we're going to sit in a circle. And it's really important for them to have that space where they can where they just go and they like, it's time for the garden, and the first place we're going is the seating area, wherever that's, it's a bunch of logs, it's stumps. I don't love stumps because they move and they wiggle, and they have to be pretty short for preschoolers, and they, because otherwise their legs don't touch the ground, and then they like tip over on the stumps unless they're like buried into the dirt. Just things to think about. But like, um it like upside down buckets sometimes work. Crates, I've seen, like, just milk crates, like flip those over and have them sit on them. um I really like convertible benches. So they make these kits that are like these plastic frames that you slide 2x4s into, and they're convertible because the back is a back of the bench, but you can flip it so that it becomes a tabletop. And they don't tip over, right? Like they can't like rock them, like they can rock a log or a stump, or they're just more stable because they're bench. So just making sure you have a seating area, generally some sort of circle, square, something so that everybody can kind of see each other. I also use audible clues cues to try and get their attention. I have a garden flute that I use like all the time. And it's the way that kids know to rotate to different stations. It's the way they know to stop, look, and listen. It's the way that they know that I'm ready to like start the lesson, and so that they should be listeners at that point. It's the way I get them to like, if things are starting to unwind, like just stop. I also have a megaphone that I use to just kind of, if I feel like I need to like broadcast an announcement. Sometimes people bring out their like responsive classroom chimes. I know garden educators who have like a harmonica and just like play the harmonica to get everyone's attention. But having some sort of audible cue, especially outside, is really helpful. I know there's like, if you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. But if you've got kids spread out in the garden, it's hard. They don't hear you. Like they literally don't hear you. So that it doesn't work like it does in a classroom. So just some sort of noisemaker. I avoid whistles because they're a little too alarmist, but some sort of noisemaker is great. I that thing about, I want the pink one, I want the blue one, can I have the red one? Like, again, if you have like a selection, if you have a bunch of parents have like donated all of their tools to your program and you just have like all of these different tools, do what you can with what you have. But if you're looking to like stock your garden program, get all of the same stuff so that you just don't have that problem. A lot of those kid tools, those plastic kid tools, come branded, like they've got like Diego on them or Mickey or Minnie, like, but sandpaper will take them right off. Just like I sand those like logos right off of there, and then nobody's like, I don't want the Dora one, so I don't have to worry about that either. So really going for like uniformity as much as possible, especially like with the seating stuff too. If you've got like one blue crate and all the other crates are black, the blue crate's going to be an issue. So get rid of the blue crate. If there's like one tool that is like a favorite tool for like everybody's always fighting for that tool, just get rid of that tool. So that I had like a giant shovel in with all of my little trowels. It was like a big one, and they were always like, I want that one, and I just don't use it anymore. I got rid of it. So I would just aim for like as much uniformity as possible, because you're already in a more chaotic environment than you are in the classroom, and so it's really good to like try and avoid as much chaos as possible out there by like just make it as easy as it can for you. I do not expect perfection. I just like, my garden is not perfect at home. I've never been a perfect gardener, but if you're like an ornamental gardener and things are like, really, you just want things to be a certain way and kind of, they need to be a certain distance, and I just kind of give up on that with PreK and K, and first and second and third. Like, I just don't really expect that. And if it happens, if they really get the seed spacing right, fantastic. But I kind of am like, that's awesome. You planted a seed like 5 feet too deep. But whatever, you planted a seed. Like, just don't stress it. And like, um, and that kind of goes to like the next bullet of like seed poking versus broadcasting. Like, what I do with them is I just give them like a handful of seeds, and I have them like spread them out, and I tell them to make them a peace sign apart, so that they all should like try and make them this far apart from each other, and then we just like poke them in. So there's no rows or anything like that. And then when they start to grow, we stick like bamboo poles in, and we string twine between the poles, and so it's just it's very, very like haphazard. And I think that that's just what makes it less stressful. Like, I don't have a goal of like this perfection. So I don't put that on them either. I also do a lot of broadcasting of like little seeds. So we will like broadcast kale seeds, or we'll broadcast lettuce seeds, or, um, just all those small seeds. Like, I don't try and space them. I don't give them the peace sign distance. Like I would, if I was doing a pea planting. And so we just kind of throw them in, and then I have them like tickle the dirt like this. We just tickle them in so that you can't really see them anymore. Um, and if necessary, I'll go back and I'll thin them. But I generally just let them go. So we talked about some of the seeds and seed selection that I use. And then transplanting. So I do transplant, or I do like get transplants and transplant with pre-K and K a lot. So, but I tend to use pretty hardy transplants. We love marigolds. Marigolds are like super difficult to kill, even if they, grab the top or like break it. The thing is still going to come back up. So so I would, marigolds are good. Um, Sunflower bean and pea seeds, again, things that will generally come up, even if they get planted a little too deep or, too shallow. And I also like overplant a lot. Like, I give them way more seeds than we need, just knowing that some of them aren't going to make it. I use colors. We talked about using smells as like cues in the garden, but I use colors a lot. Like, let's meet at the blue bed, or I give them color cards, like paint chip cards, and say, find something that's this color and find something that's this color, and they kind of, it's a way to get them to like explore the garden without telling them to like go to the kale or find the kale, because they might not know what kale is yet, and they might not read the kale sign, but they can find like the green plant or whatever. So using colors as cues, having them do really big work. I do a lot of rock moving. If you have rocks, I do a lot of rock moving with preschool, and like getting them to like pick up like big heavy things. It's like, it's developmentally really great for them to kind of feel that resistance and using their body and their strength. So like moving like buckets of mulch and buckets of wood chips and buckets of dirt, and like, I mean, when I say buckets, I mean like those little like 2 gallon buckets. I don't get them to move like 5 gallon buckets of things, or I'll use like those trugs with like the 2 handles. And I say there's 2 handles. So there's 2 people on each, so that they're using some teamwork. Um, yeah, minimizing hazards in the garden, kind of goes without saying, but just they trip over things. So trying to keep pathways as clear and as clearly labeled as possible, like putting down mulch, or if it's a mowed path, or if it's a gravel path, like just really having a clear delineation of like the space that they're supposed to be in, especially so they don't like walk on the edges of beds and stuff. And then I use a lot of the grownups, right? So they come out, I mentioned this, they come out with a lot of grownups. I put all of the grownups to work, and I give them like something. They're going to hand out these shovels. They're in charge of collecting the shovels. They're going to be over at the mulch pile, helping the kids like fill up their buckets. They're going to be, so that it helps me with the grownups too, who tend to, if they're not engaged in something directly with a garden, like chat amongst themselves, which is really distracting to me and to the kids. So making sure that if you're working with if you're not the preschool teacher, if you're working with a preschool classroom, that you're using the grownups to help you with whatever you're doing in the garden. Next slide. All right. We have come to the end of my spiel. So I'm School Sprouts. You can find me online. You can also email me. I'm hope@schoolsprouts.org. And I'm in the Pioneer Valley. So if you want to see any of these like gardens in action, I always welcome visitors to come and see what it looks like when I do it. I'm a real visual kinesthetic learner, so I love seeing other people doing their thing. And if you want to come see me doing my thing, come on over.
Great. Hope, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. All right. So if you have any questions for Hope, please use the chat. And Hope, there were some, I don't know if you were able to see the introductions in the Q&A and the chat, but there's people, a lot of interesting people here from all over the state and Philly and Denver. And yeah, it's a really nice mixed crowd. So if anyone has any questions, specific questions, please throw them in the chat now. And I am sorry for the chat difficulty when you first arrived. If I can figure out how to unmute people, I can also, you can also, you know, to Hope as well.
Am I allowed to ask questions?
Yeah, I think you're allowed to do anything. You're the host. Yeah.
So I have a question for Pia, who's on Martha's Vineyard. I don't know. I'll ask the question and you can let me.
Wait, Hope, before you ask that question, you have one question in the Q&A. How many times throughout the school year are you at the preschool?
Yeah. Okay, so that so it depends on the preschool. I see my preschoolers in East Hampton 7 times a year. So we have 3 fall and 4 spring visits with me. I see kids in Williamsburg closer to 22 times actually. So it really depends on like where I am. The Northampton program is also 7 visits over the course of the year.
And Anne, hi Anne. Anne wrote that Anne loves getting Mass Farm to School updates and newsletters. I am going to put, we have a, if you want to subscribe to our newsletter, we do send a lot of newsletters out. We also have a Harvest of the Month for educators newsletter for elementary and secondary. I'm going to put the link in if you want to sign up. It's a monthly newsletter that is connected to our monthly crop. And in the newsletter, there are garden activities and there are classroom activities related to that specific crop. And there are also book suggestions and all sorts of things. So I will find that and put that in the chat while Hope asks her question to Pia. Hope, you had a question?
Yeah, so I'm wondering if the preschool class, if Pia is actually going into the preschool classrooms, those 10 like preschool and toddler classrooms, and if they have a garden at each one of those, or if those 10 classrooms are coming to like a site every week. Because it sounds like Suzanne's got like the trustees has a location. I don't know which location you're at, Suzanne, but that preschoolers are coming to every week. And I used to do programs like that in Northampton, actually at Crimson and Clover. We did like a parent-child preschool. It wasn't a drop-off, but it was like a parent-child preschool program, and similar similar kind of stuff is what I was just talking about. Appleton. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so they're coming to you. They're coming to, yeah. Each has its own garden. It's a lot of garden. Oh my gosh. Okay. So yeah, that's a lot of garden to maintain. Um, I would be curious to know, like, are they all the same? Have you designed them? Are they similar in any way? Or are you kind of going in to those preschools? Is it the Pia with the Island Institute? I don't know.
I have to scroll back.
I don't
I'm
think it's
trying to figure out how to unmute Pia. Also, there is a question for you while we figure that out, from Pia in the chat. Do the teachers keep up with the Garden Hope, or is that something that you only do?
Do the teachers like maintain the garden, or do they go out there on their own?
Do they
Like
keep up with it? Do they maintain? Do they go out on their own? Do they support it? Or is it like you just go in and you're kind of, they wait for you?
Yeah. So it depends on the classroom. It depends on the actual teacher. So some teachers use the garden on the regular, and I will go and I will, like, in Northampton, I'll see my students like once every 3 weeks during the growing season. But there are some teachers who use the garden in the off weeks. Like they will come out on their own to either do like a writing activity, or they might do like a scavenger hunt. But they're generally not maintaining the garden. They might water if I've asked them to water. Very few of them will actually weed. And most of the garden maintenance is on me. And I tend to get the students involved in that. I know that there are other garden programs where they're really focused on delivering content, and the educators are the ones who maintain the kids don't necessarily do a lot of the weeding and maintenance of the garden. And we do have parent volunteer days in the fall and the spring where we kind of do the big work. So that happens as well.
I pushed a button and it brought Pia to the screen with the mic. So if you, Pia,
Yes.
yay, okay, it
Yes,
worked.
hi.
Hi.
I'm very excited about this, and I feel sometimes lonely as being the sole preschool garden educator on the vineyard. I've only been doing this job. This is my second school year. And I am going to the Institute in March, so I'm looking forward to meeting
The conference, great.
other educators at Smith College. Um, do any of your schools use the garden as sort of like regulatory, like self-regulation type places? That very often I find that sometimes if a child has had some sort of issue, their quote unquote, not punishment, but the consequence is that they don't get to do gardening with me, which
Oh.
is really sad. And I feel terrible about that. And I feel like that child even more needs to be in the garden doing work and taking care of something and like figuring out their own little thing. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, that's really interesting, that they're taking that away. I mean, there certainly have been times when like kids are almost like in crisis, like they're completely dysregulated, in which case it's difficult to have them be around dirt and tools and other students and it stays safe. And so in that case, they have been like, I wouldn't even say that they've been removed, but but they'll go do their own thing. And they'll like, there's enough grown up. So the grown up will like take them off to like the compost or like a different space, but still they're in the garden. It's interesting that they're like, those, because yeah, I mean, I completely agree that like the garden is a great place to re-regulate, you know, to actually like get into your body and and focus on something other than yourself and your own feelings, and like look at the worms and look at the, you know, as long as you can keep it safe. I I think that's interesting. It's also, you know, it's also challenging because like you're going into somebody else's like preschool space, and they have their own ways of doing it,
Right.
um and so that, I think that you could make it clear to the classroom teachers that like you're okay with that level of, if you are, if you're okay with that level of chaos, you're okay with kids being like a little bit wild because you feel like, you know, the garden is a good place for them to just, yeah, to like self-regulate. But I find that to be difficult. I've been working in the schools that I'm working in for a long time. Like I'm um in my 20th year working in Williamsburg. So I don't bump up against that anymore because I've been in the district for so long. Like the teachers kind of defer to me in the garden, and if I'm okay with it, then they're okay with it, as opposed to vice versa. So, I mean, I think that you could communicate with your classroom teachers and just, you know, that you're okay with it, and then you, but you kind of have to let them come around to being okay with having kids out there, even if they're a little bit dysregulated. Um, that's tough. It's tough because I hate like having kids miss out on that opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. And I only this year I'm seeing all of my classes on an every other week basis. Last
Mhm.
year I was doing every week and I really sort of backed myself into a corner time-wise. It was very not sustainable for me. So this year it's a lot easier. But then if, you know, children miss out, then that's like almost a month that they
Yeah.
don't get to work with me. I don't get to work with them. And a lot of times I'll see something and my background is as a preschool
Yeah.
educator. I'm new into the whole gardening thing. So I will see something in the child that I celebrate, and the teacher, unless I mention it, would never have even seen that.
Mhm.
Sort of like how carefully they did, you know, X, Y, and Z, or they really noticed something and were able to use their words to communicate information, and that they're like their thinking process, they're really thinking about what I'm saying. Whereas in the classroom, they might present as a totally different individual. It's really interesting. I just am really thankful for everything my job brings to my life. And I'm really, you know, when kids see me at Stop and Shop, I'm like the rock star. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. No, it's great. Yeah, I totally agree with like I've never been so grateful for what I do than during COVID too, because I was like, I'm outside with kids all the time. Like, you know, it's just I really, yeah, I love the work, and I totally hear what you're saying. I think that like, you know, pointing that stuff out to your classroom teachers and pointing out that like, you know, your relationship with the child is like affected when they when they're not allowed to
Mm.
come to you for a month. You know, if there was any way that a different consequence could be, you know, developed as opposed to keeping them away from the garden, because I think that's a legit just kind of feedback for the teachers to just understand where you're coming from. Like they may think that like you're just grateful that you don't have to deal with like the crazy kid, but you don't actually see them that way. I feel the same way. Like those kids that are like bouncing off walls inside come to the garden and are like super focused on like digging this big hole, and they love it and they're totally into it. I love the idea of like a dig zone and planting golf balls. I think that maybe I'm going to plant golf balls as practice to planting potatoes and see if they can then like dig them up again. I love this golf ball.
Yeah, I love
idea.
that idea. And you see, Hope, that there's another question in, there's a question, do you try
Yeah,
to
the little spaces. It's a really good question, because when you're talking about little kids, like, yeah, like little domes and little like, I actually don't do that. I don't create little archways or like planting tent kind of spaces, trellises that are especially small. Um, I think in part because it's hard to get like all of us in there, and they become an attractive nuisance in the garden because the big kids want to go in there too. Like my gardens are not just preschool gardens, right? So if you're in just a preschool garden, then maybe creating a space, but you have to make it big enough so that all of the preschoolers can get in there, which means that it's maybe not as small as you think it is. And I do, we do gather like underneath the fruit trees and things like that. And so that there's a little bit of like a roof over us. But no, I tend not to actually create those little spaces. I mean, that said, there's like little spaces all around the garden, but it, again, my gardens are like designed for the full range.
Great. I want to just be cognizant of your time, Hope, and everyone's time here. Is anyone have any last questions that they want to ask? Either talk to Hope or throw it in the chat.
You're so welcome, Pia. It's great to hear from you too.
And you're going to get a videotape of this and also Hope's presentation. And on the presentation is Hope's email address. So if you have a specific question, I know Hope is always willing to talk gardens. And also, I'm just going to give, Hope doesn't just work with early childhood, but also goes through all the grades. So if you have any questions on anything about school gardens, Hope is a really tremendous resource. Lee asked, have you used animals in your garden? We are thinking of tradering rabbits on top of.
I think it's tractoring, but
tractoring
rabbits
on top of our beds.
Yeah, no, I mean, you totally could. I have done some minimal stuff with chickens, but I run farm camp in the summertime, and we have goats and pigs and cows and sheep and chickens and rabbits and like all of that. So we've definitely like, we have the goats come up and clear some stuff in the garden early in the season. We do stuff like that, but it's more in a camp session and not in a school session setting, because I don't, it's a lot to transport those animals back and forth. Nobody's living at the school. To like, if you were at a private school, it might be different, but nobody's actually living at the school. But, Lee, for your setting, I think it could be a great way to like kind of create that mini ag setting that you were talking about in an earlier chat post. And actually show kids how you would like move livestock from like one place to another, and how their manure like helps the soil and all of that. Like I tend to actually stay away from manure in the school gardens. It just it brings up like too much baggage. It's a lot to get into, and like it causes red flags for admin, for parents, for there's just not a lot of knowledge around it. But I think in that setting it could be great.
Great. Thanks for that question, Lee. Any other last questions before we all head out? All right. So thank you all for coming, and thanks so much for registering. And please stay in touch with my email address is also in the presentation. Stay in touch. If you have any ideas for workshops, if you want to offer a workshop, please reach out to me. It's great to get new voices and build connections. And lastly, I'll say that we are working on a school garden coordinator informal, we have a network, and if you want to join that network, please email me. I'm just going to put my email in the chat. We were meeting monthly on Zoom. It fell out, but we're going to get back to it.
Okay. But I've been wondering about that because
it just fell out. It's going to get back on though. So,
Okay.
please tell me if you want to get in our, if you're not already in the Mass Farm to School Garden Coordinator Network and you'd like to be, I can add you to the group.
Those are great conversations. So definitely join those if you're interested in doing this a little bit more regularly.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks. Have a great night, everyone.